From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Danda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Are your work meetings broken? Not because of bad agendas, not because people aren't engaged, but because they aren't actually designed to deliver real value. Today's guest has spent years studying how businesses think. After buying and turning around a failing manufacturing company, he realized something shocking. Businesses keep solving problems the same way, even when those methods clearly don't work. That's what led him to develop freaky thinking, a radical new approach to tackling impossible business challenges, and the meeting maximizer, a game-changing method to turn routine meetings from a time drain into a powerful engine for growth. So welcome to the show, Chris Thomason. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Paddy, for the invitation too.
Oh, you're welcome, Chris. And I have to say, meetings are a drain. I haven't met anybody that says, I really look forward to all my meetings this week. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation, and I think a super valuable one, especially for business analysts, because as BAs, we often have to not just attend meetings, but actually facilitate them. So that's going to be super useful, I think, for everybody. And Chris, for this episode, which superpower would you like to bring?
Well, if I was a superhero, I'd like to be known as Silence Man. Because in meetings, I like to bring in 10 seconds of silence that when you ask a question, people like to jump in straight away, often to show how clever they are. But if you just use a simple mechanism, give me 10 seconds of silence, and you hold the silence, I know exactly what's going on in those 10 seconds. People are thinking. I may not know what they're thinking about. Hopefully it's about the question I posed, but they are thinking, and it's giving everybody in the meeting time to think. And that's a superpower I'd like to bring and share this evening.
Oh, amazing. And I've got my Marvel t-shirt on. I think I might need to add that to my collection as a new future superhero. And silence is super powerful. I absolutely hear where you're coming from, because it feels quite awkward when there is silence in a meeting and we feel like we have to fill that void with something, not even anything valuable, but it just feels like it's human nature to jump in with something or other. And Chris, another area that I'd love to explore with you today is the sort of art of brainstorming, because I know it's something that we all do as business analysts. We're taught from probably our early career that brainstorming is a great way to bring about ideas, innovate. So I hear you've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with brainstorming. Can you tell us more about that?
I might describe it as a hate-hate relationship with brainstorming. I've never really liked brainstorming because it doesn't suit the way I personally think. Because I like the silence, I find the silence works best for me. And I found out as well that it works best for others as well. But often in a brainstorming session, you're forced to be thinking here and now. And there are basic rules in brainstorming, such as only one person talking at a time. But what it means is there's always someone talking. Now, fine, you can build on their ideas, you can bounce off what they're saying. But sometimes you just think, can't we just have some silence just to think about this topic first of all? And I've run actually a couple of interesting experiments. I work with Lloyd's Banking Group, and I ran an exercise with some of their salespeople actually in motorcycle finance. And I said, I'm going to ask you a question. And I'd made it a deliberately quite a vague, open question. And I said, are you ready to answer this question now and think about it? But I said, can we just clarify something first of all? Do you mean this? And I cut them off. I said, please don't clarify anything. I've asked an open question, and I'd like you to interpret it the way you want to. But when you start clarifying things, when you start hearing other people talking, that starts focusing in, whatever the broader question was, you start seeing when people are nodding at something, oh, that's obviously a hot topic. So you focus subconsciously on that area. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like brainstorming at all, both for myself and for other people, because it's a bit demeaning to thinking, in my opinion.
Interesting. And you talked there about asking the right questions. So what are some useful questions we could be asking to get people to really think deeply before they jump in with maybe some answers to the questions?
I like to phrase what I call killer questions. Questions that are hard to answer, that you don't know the answer to, but that you know, if we could answer that question, it would significantly and beneficially add value. So it's worthwhile asking. But I've found in the work environment, and not just in banks, in other areas too, we like to pose the questions that we already know the answers to. Why? It makes us look smart. What do you think we should do here? And people might suggest some things, or they might say, we're not too sure. Well, one option is to do this. Oh, wow, you know the answer. Well, of course I knew the answer. That's why I asked the question. But we've got to lift up our questions. We've got to be out posing those difficult, challenging questions where the immediate answer is, I don't know. But in the work environment, and even in the personal environment, we don't like using the phrase, I don't know. In the work environment, it can be seen as a career-limiting move. You don't know, aren't you supposed to? And somebody who jumps in with some rubbish idea, they actually come across better than you do, who wanted to say, I don't know, but give me time to think about it. Look, they've got ideas. Yeah, but they're rubbish ideas. That's the same old, same old. You've got to ask the questions and then wait for the silence. And the silence might be 10 seconds, 10 hours, 10 days, but give people time to think. Give people time to come up with those great answers to those great questions.
And would you recommend posing questions before you even get to the meeting, or are we really looking here at the right questions during the session itself?
Well, I think a great question takes a lot of effort. I spend a lot of time thinking about questions and coming up with the answers both for myself and for other people. But I don't start trying to answer a question as soon as I've come up with it. When I come up with a question, I never try and hold it in my head either. I will write it down. Because it's only when you try and write your question down, you realize, wait a minute, I didn't quite mean that. Whereas if you try and hold it in your head, you think you know exactly what the question is, but you don't. And I'll write it down, then I'll walk away from it. And I'll come back 1 hour, 2 hours later, 1 day, 2 days later, and just check, do I feel that question is still the right question to ask? And it's surprising how often it isn't. Because you've put a question in your head, even though you weren't trying to answer it, it's an unanswered question and your subconscious is churning it over. So when you do come back to reconsider the question, you may have some different thoughts on it. You may think, actually, it's a much better question, or I'll just reword it. But thinking about the question, whether it's before the meeting, so you've got time in the meeting to actually say, I've thought about this and I think this is a good question, that is probably the best way to go. But always think about your question. And I think often we spend too much time trying to focus on the answer and not enough time on the question.
Yeah, I think I found over the years when we're engaging with stakeholders, we sort of walk into a meeting and it's this sort of interview process that I've got to extract as much information out of you as I can. But I think if we compare the time spent to prepare for that conversation versus the actual conversation, I think a lot of us, and I used to make this mistake myself, don't really spend that much prep time at all. We almost assume the work's going to be done in the meeting itself. And from what you're saying there, you know, the art of asking questions, it's super important. You know, even on these podcasts, I find because I've done so many of them now, the questions start to just come. But when I first started off, I was terrible. I'd have to write the questions down. I'd be sort of mulling over them, thinking them through, procrastinating over, should I be asking this or should I be asking that? And I think asking the right questions is definitely an art. And as business analysts, it's probably one of our most powerful tools around that sort of area of curiosity. Curiosity, I think, is a superpower as well, where you've got to be curious in order to get to the right solution. And looking at your background, you've worked in the corporate world. Can you give us some stories of where maybe meetings didn't go so well? And what were some of the things you learned from those?
Well, in fact, before the corporate world, I did an MBA. And soon after the MBA is when I bought a company and turned it around. And I realized during that time running that company that I was applying all my skills from the MBA to turn the company around, and it was working well. But there was in fact, it was the start of my whole creative spirituality, if you want. There was one moment when I was bringing in people who worked in the same industry, and we manufactured equipment for the chemical industry for highly corrosive environments. We were using fiberglass and materials, expensive resins. When stainless steel, it just isn't strong enough. It will be eaten through in hours. We had to use composite materials. And I used to bring people in who use composite materials, but in other industries, so they weren't direct competitors. Because obviously competitors wouldn't talk to me. And we had a problem. Our raw materials were very expensive, but they were classified such that we couldn't dispose of them in normal rubbish. We had to dispose of them in special places. And then I asked this guy, I said, where do you dispose of your rubbish, your offcuts? He said, I don't have offcuts. I said, what do you mean? And when he told me what he did, an hour and a half after he'd gone, we didn't have any waste either. And that's when I realized that actually what they taught in the MBA, I've missed a whole raft of thinking of, which was the creative thinking. It's about asking the right questions, as you're referring to. I was asking, how do we dispose of our waste? I should have been asking, how do we not have waste? But I couldn't envisage that question. I just assumed you've always got waste. But this person corrected me. And that's when I realized the power of asking questions. And I know, I joined a consultancy actually, Seren. They are now EY Seren. They've been bought out by EY a good few years ago. And they asked me, when I joined as one of the two managing consultants, I spent 4 years there, they said, can you try and grow our work in this particular company? I won't mention the company's name, because they got very little work from that area, but they felt they should have a lot more. And I started basing myself in their office. We got a small bit of work. And people were asking me about things. And I said, I can do that for you. I can give you a price. But are you sure that's what you want to do? Isn't the question that you really want answered this question? And they said, you're right. Can you give us a price on that as well? So I gave them the price to do what they wanted, but a price to do what I recommended. And it turns out in the end, they wanted to do what I recommended. It was a slightly different strategic level. But in the end, I sold so much work into that organization, and I'm not a salesman, but I talk to people. I help them to answer, or I help them to pose the right questions. And it just so happened that I was getting work from them. So that's actually how I developed a whole stream of work in this organization for my employer, just by helping to ask the right questions. And I think they often had the same situation as I did in that small company I bought. They couldn't conceive of a different type of question. They were asking the same old questions in variants and continue along the same path. It was my job to help them find a new path. And I think that's what we've all got to do. Ask those challenging questions which shift us into a different path.
And asking the right questions, I mean, that sounds really simple, right? That on paper, it sounds like, yes, I've just got to make sure it's a really crystal clear question. I've used the right words, etc. Are there any tips you can give for someone who's looking to build that habit of asking those questions? Are there practical things we could do on a day-to-day basis, just so we start to build that questioning muscle?
Definitely. And it aligns to answering the question as well, because a great question requires great answers. So if you want great answers, which is actually what we're looking for, we've got to be asking the great question in the first place. Now, people talk about being creative and thinking outside of the box. That's the worst possible advice you can get. Think of it this way. If you use ChatGPT and you write a vague prompt, you get wild, rambling outputs from the AI. But if you start writing well-defined prompts, if you actually tell the AI, I want you to include this area, break this down, don't include that, do it in this style. So if you give it a box to think into, you get a much better output. And that's the art of good prompt engineering or prompt writing. And it's the same with RI, real intelligent, that when you ask a good question, asking a great question defines the box that you think into. And you'll know that those weird and wonderful ideas that brainstorming tries to encourage, that it's about quantity, not quality, really go out there. You can fill a board full of Post-it notes full of rubbish, when actually you want to have a well-defined box in the middle that is defined by your killer question. How can we do this with these things such that this happens, but not going beyond this space or this line? That defines a box. And then when you're putting your Post-it notes, your ideas in there, you know when they're landing in. Some might be on the border, some might be just outside, but you'll know, oh no, that's way outside. So I shouldn't be thinking there. Let me try and bring my thinking back in. But you can actually break that box down. Let's say you had a box. You could break it down into 4 sub-questions. You could break each of those 4 sub-questions down into 4 more sub-questions and be answering each of those individually and putting your Post-it notes in there. When you've done that 4 times, you've answered 16 sub-questions, all inside your bigger question. And that's how you start building up the ideas. And when you've got the ideas, you can start combining them, mixing them, asking other people, hey, what would you do with this? That's when you bring the outside parties in, when you've done your raw creativity. And that's best done alone. Imagine a team of 4, and 4 people went off and did their own thinking like that, and then brought their best ideas together and said, right, let's mix and match now, and let's see what genius we can come up with. That is the way to genius.
Talking about genius, it reminds me of Mr. Jeff Bezos, who famously got asked this question about, well, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And it just reminded me of this notion of making sure you're asking the right questions. And he turns around and he says, well, that's the wrong question. Like, ask me what's not going to change in the next 10 years. And so from Amazon's perspective, he talks about, customers will always want lower prices. They'll always want faster delivery. And people always want a big selection. And as long as Amazon are fulfilling those 3 goals, he feels that they'll always be competitive and they'll always be sort of the best in their industry. And it really resonated when you were talking that through, especially the sort of manufacturing example there as well, that we're often sort of tunneled into just asking the obvious things that we think we should be asking, when actually experiment, try different questions, talk to different people, and maybe we'll get surprised. So I love that. ChatGPT, you mentioned there. Do you think ChatGPT will help business analysts in the future, especially when we're doing a lot of the engagement work with stakeholders, especially when we're looking to perhaps do our day-to-day work as business analysts? Or do you think it's going to make us lazy?
I could have turned that question round, Paddy, and said, why won't it help us to actually do things for business analysts? But undoubtedly, it's going to help us, I think, to take away some of the mundane is the wrong word, but shall we say the repetitive work, the ones where you can clearly define a task. You can make it do that. I mean, we've already had RPA, robotic process engineering, for quite a while now, manually or automatically running tasks. It's now bringing the smarts into it as well, where it can bring the thinking in. And I think the power will be where we decide to use it. And I think the skill is, how can it help me as a BA? That is the wrong question to ask. Break your career down, break your job roles down, and say, how can it help me to achieve this type of function? How can it help me deliver this type of work? How can it help me do whatever? Because if you look at all the big matrix of what you have to do, where you want to be as a BA, you can look at all those elements. How could it help me develop personally? What would normally take me 10 years to do? How can I do it in 10 days? How can I become an expert? In fact, some years ago, I was working for a large organization in chemical manufacturing, and I'd been given a new role. And there was all sorts of terminology that I didn't know. But one weekend, I actually took all these big files and folders, because this was in the days before the internet, really. I took all the folders home from the suppliers and providers. I thought, let me read up on this, because it was a nightmare. And when you start reading up on things and you start structuring information, it isn't that complex. Very few things really are that complex. You might have some difficult words, but when you map them out, and you see what they mean, suddenly you start to understand, right, this is very straightforward. And it was only 2 weeks later, I was in a meeting, and the CEO of the organization actually asked, who's this new guy? He seems to be our expert in that field. And 2 weeks ago, I was learning from brochures. But that's the way it can go. And you can become an expert overnight. And I think with ChatGPT, you can become an expert in an hour. Now, there's appearing to be an expert and there's having that in-depth expertise. So you've got to balance the two. It's what the artificial intelligence can actually do that helps you from a process perspective. Because often it isn't about coming up with an idea or an output. It's having that process that you can run anytime, and you can come up with the idea or the process, the output anytime you need. So it's focusing on process rather than the actual output. And that's where we can all benefit from artificial intelligence, finding out how it can help us with our processes.
Oh, great advice there. And I think this whole theme of questioning is super important. Even as we're using ChatGPT, we know there's a lot of fake news. It hallucinates and does all these crazy things. So as BAs, I think we've got a real important role in actually that critical thinking, questioning what it's giving us, and actually making sure we're asking the right questions on the follow-up prompts to make sure we get to the real value that it's trying to give us. And I'm always confused about meetings versus workshops. I hear people use these terms interchangeably. What's your guidance there? Like, when do we need a meeting versus a workshop?
I think workshops are essentially when you want to create something, whether it's create something completely afresh that wasn't there before, or you've got some kind of issue that you want to try and change it or resolve a problem or something. So I think the workshop is more of a hands-on session. Whereas with meetings, they're often reporting sessions. And I've used ChatGPT to say, get me some stats on why meetings are so bad and why meetings are really good. It finds all sorts of stats and qualified references on why they are so bad, why they are so inefficient. There's not a lot on why they are so good, actually. And yet we've been having meetings for centuries. And I don't think anyone ever wishes, I wish we had more meetings. That's one thing that they don't ask for. And I'm working on something about how to make meetings, maybe not more effective overall, but how a very small part of them can add 10 times more value than the whole meeting does already. Because meetings are very interesting situations, because it brings knowledgeable people who have experience in a range of relevant math issues to the topic at hand, it brings them together and focuses them on that topic for 30, 60, 90 minutes. Potentially, the brain power there is huge. And then what do? You listen to somebody else reporting back, throwing cheap ideas around. It's a missed opportunity. And the meeting maximizer concept is about, in that meeting, pose a killer question. Obviously, a killer question which is relevant to the purpose of your meeting. But pose a question that you've never asked before that people would say, I don't know how we answer that. But then you don't try and answer it in the meeting. All you do is pose a question, agree, is that the question that we're all going to try and answer? Yes. You stop there. Because we don't do our best thinking in meetings. We do our best thinking walking the dog, in the shower, driving. So when you have a week or 2 weeks or a month until the next meeting, you've got time to think on that topic in your best thinking time. And because it's a challenging topic, it's not one, oh, what's the answer? Yeah, I've got the answer. I can finish it now. It stays in your mind, in your subconscious. It percolates. And because it's intriguing, because it's aroused your curiosity, because it will add real value if you come up with something good, and because it's not a win or bust situation, you may not answer it perfectly, but if you answer it to 25%, you're 25% further than you were before because you never asked that question before. It's still going to add real value. So that is meeting maximizer. And then what you can do asynchronously, people can add their best ideas to a Confluence page, a SharePoint, a shared document. And somebody who's been nominated will run through the ideas and maybe bring the best 6 back to the next meeting. At the start of the next meeting, you say, that question we posed, here are the best 6 answers that we've come up with. What do we think we should take forward? Should we take one of them and have another cycle where we think again like this? Or should we action something? But it's getting the thinking in the gap between the meetings, not trying to think in the meeting, not trying to brainstorm in the meeting, in the moment, under pressure. None of us do our best thinking then.
Oh, that's, again, great insight there, Chris. And I'm really excited to see your upcoming talk at the BA Life conference. I know you're one of the keynote speakers there. What can we expect from your talk at the conference?
Well, I'm going to talk on freaky thinking. It's a new approach because brainstorming is actually 72 years old this year. It's from 1953. Now, as a BA, what other tools are you using today in your work role that are 72 years old? Not a lot, if any. In fact, when a tool gets more than sort of 6, 7, 8 years old, it's replaced for a new one. So why are we still using brainstorming as the go-to mechanism for our thinking? It's about trying to think differently. It's about posing killer questions. And it's about recognizing that in the Eisenhower matrix, which is the important, not important, urgent, not urgent, the 4 quadrants, the important and not urgent is the most valuable quadrant. And that's where your killer questions sit. They're important because they have real value, but they're not urgent. So you do have time to think on them. What often happens, we leave that stuff because it's not urgent now, I've got plenty of time to do it. And suddenly it slides across to the urgent category. And when you come back to it, oh no, I've got to come up with something quickly. Poor quality thinking or poorer quality thinking. So I'm going to be talking about these things in the talk and offering Meeting Maximizer that anybody who's in a large organization who'd like to try it for free, more than welcome to actually let me know and ask me and we can organize that.
Oh, that's such a valuable resource. I'm certainly going to be checking the Meeting Maximizer out because I'm sure it will help me in all of my meetings that are coming up. So I'm definitely going to check that out. And Chris, I'm going to spring a question on you that you have no idea about because I like to keep this one a surprise, but it's one of my favorite questions to end the show. If you could have any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, what would that be? And you know what? As good BAs, we're going to run a pilot, and we're going to do it for 24 hours and see what happens in the world. So what would that thing be that really grinds at you that you would like to abolish?
I'd like to abolish questions that people know the answer to already. In fact, the second one would be that using the phrase "I don't know" in an organization should be seen as a power play, not something to be ashamed or embarrassed about, and something you must never do. And if somebody's asking you a question, especially someone senior, and you do know the answer, imagine you could go back and say, don't you have a better question than that? Do you really want me to waste my time trying to answer that question? And in fact, the challenge would be, I'm going to come back to you with a better question. And you can go back to them with a better question. You may not know everything about the situation, but if they say, wow, you've hit the nail on the head, it's not about finding the answer, it's about finding a better question. And then they will ask that question, maybe of you, but of other people as well. But why not go back? Why not question the questions? So I would try and abolish instant answers and try and abolish the fact that saying I don't know is seen as something negative in the work environment.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. So folks, let's try that for one day. I've got all the BAs now on this session. I'd love for you all to take that one away and let's see how it goes just for 24 hours. And Chris, it's been such a pleasure talking to you on this episode. How can people get in touch with you? How can they get hold of the Meeting Maximizer as well?
Well, we can put a link in the bottom of the page, can't we here, Paddy?
Yep, in the show notes, we'll include that link in there.
Right. Now, just contact me via LinkedIn, message me there, whatever. In fact, you'll actually find a newsletter that I write called Meeting Maximizer. It's about making meetings better and how we can think better in and around our meetings. So please follow that as well. But use LinkedIn, get in touch with me. That's the best way. And if you're in a large organization and you want to be the person who tries to introduce this new way of thinking and is recognized as, you're not just a BA, you brought something in that's changed the whole organization, let me know. I can help you be that person, be that BA.
Oh, brilliant. And Chris, honestly, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel a little bit wiser than I was at the start. So I really want to thank you for your time today and really looking forward to your session at the conference as well.
My pleasure, Paddy. Thank you very much.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.